He had found Assagioli's book, the basic manual of psychosynthesis, and was doing practices, exercises out of it. So that got me really interested, and I decided to buy the book for my husband for Christmas because he's a
Wow.
psychologist, and I thought, well, he'd be interested in this. Jim, my husband, was working on a PhD, and he wasn't real happy with his PhD program. It was kind of mainstream and not very exciting. So he decided to take an independent study in psychosynthesis. Tom and Ann Yeomans were also at UC Santa Barbara and
Okay.
took that workshop. So we got involved at the very same time. All kinds of really interesting people were part of that course. Tom and Ann Yeomans took it as well.
Yes.
They came and stayed with us while we were going to the course. Harry Sloan was in that group. These are all early teachers of psychosynthesis. So
Yes, definitely.
it was a hotbed of
Mm.
people. It was really fun.
Hi, Molly,
Hi,
and welcome to Psychosynthesis Conversation.
thank you.
It's such a great joy to have you here today. You are one of the grand old ladies of Psychosynthesis. You have been around for quite a while, and you are a very well-known author. You have written many books, and some of them on psychosynthesis. And I also know that you have been teaching psychosynthesis for many, many years and have a rich background. So I would really like to start out by hearing something about your journey into psychosynthesis. How did you came about it?
That's a really fun question to answer because let's see, my oldest son is 59, and I was first getting interested in psychosynthesis when he was about 2 years old.
Hmm.
So long time ago. Anyway,
Yes.
so I was living in Berkeley, and I took a course through Esalen Institute, which was a growth center, a personal growth center in California, and they also had programs offered out of San Francisco. So I took a course in the psychology of positive development or something like that. It was something I can't remember the exact words, with Jim
Hmm.
Fadiman, who's pretty well known in the transpersonal psychology circles. At least he
Yeah.
was back then. He had found Assagioli's book, the basic manual of psychosynthesis, and was doing practices, exercises out of it. So that got me really interested, and I decided to buy the book for my husband for Christmas because he's a
Wow.
psychologist, and I thought, well, he'd be interested in this.
What time is this? Around the 70s or
Late 60s.
late 60s? Yes.
Oh, yeah, because my second son was born in 69, and I was already
Yes.
involved in psychosynthesis by then. Anyway, I bought it for him for Christmas, and we both read it, and then we're like, "Well, this is good stuff." Meanwhile, Jim, my husband, was working on a PhD, and he wasn't real happy with his PhD program. It was kind of mainstream and not very exciting. So he decided to take an independent study in psychosynthesis. And so
Okay.
he started, going to workshops and things. And we ended up down in Santa Barbara, UC Santa Barbara, where he was working on his PhD. And he invited Jim and Susan Varjú to come down and present psychosynthesis at the university. He was working
Yeah.
they were doing community programs. That was his job.
And important to mention that Jim and Susan Varjú was actually some of the leading proponents of psychosynthesis at that time because they were closely
Absolutely.
connected to Assagioli.
Yes. So they were offering after they came down and did a introductory workshop, and we were hooked even more. And incidentally, Tom and Ann Yeomans were also at UC Santa Barbara and
Okay.
took that workshop. So we got involved at the very same time.
Mm.
So then later we moved up to the Bay Area so we could take Jim and Susan Varjú's Introduction to Psychosynthesis, which was like an 8-week, once a week meeting. And then I think there was a weekend. I can't remember
Mm.
exactly how it was set up, but
Mm.
anyway, an intensive course.
Yeah.
Like a first year training would be nowadays. And all kinds of really interesting people were part of that course. Tom and Ann Yeomans took it as well.
Yes.
They came and stayed with us while they were, while we were going to the course. Harry Sloan was in that group. These are all early teachers of psychosynthesis. So
Yes, definitely.
it was a hotbed of people. It was really fun. And I mean, psychosynthesis became my life at that point.
Mm.
There was just no question. I was so taken with it. It was partly because Jim and I had been really interested in Eastern traditions, Zen
Yes.
and Buddhism and so forth. And we felt like psychosynthesis combined that sort of non-dogmatic spiritual perspective that
Yes.
we wanted. We were very interested in spirituality, but not wanting to subscribe to a particular belief system or something.
Mm.
So
Exactly.
it brought that aspect of the spiritual dimension into our
Mm.
lives.
Mm.
We're both interested in psychology as well. So it just really, really worked. So then we decided we had to go see Assagioli. I decided
Mm.
that actually Jim was a little more like conservative and we don't have any money and how are we going to do this? We have 2 small children and, but I said, we got to do this. We got it. He was like in his early 80s by then, which is how old I am now. And we were like, we don't know how much longer he'll be around and we just got to do this. So we
Yeah.
did. By that time we were back living back in New Mexico and had left so we could leave our small children with their grandparents. So,
Okay. Yeah.
like, we were, leaving them with babysitters or something, and off we went,
And was
and
that in 72, 73, or 73?
1973.
Yes.
We spent 5 weeks in Italy studying. Most of that time we were with Assagioli, but there was a week when, another group of people came to work with him, and we couldn't see him during that week, but the rest of the time we were having pretty much daily sessions with him.
Mm. But
That
was the two of you alone there, or did you come with a larger group?
We came on our own. We
Okay.
Yeah, we just were like just doing it on our own. We didn't know where we're gonna stay. We didn't,
Mm.
anything. And I have to say, Assagioli himself was extremely helpful.
Mm.
He arranged for us to stay with a family. Well, he didn't, but his secretary did while
Yes.
we were in Capelona, which was where his summer place was.
Yes.
And that was an interesting aspect even in itself because they spoke no English, we spoke no Italian other than, please and thank you. So we had great time communicating with gestures and
Mm.
and,
Yes.
maybe a few words here and there. So, but they were a lovely family, and they apparently many people in this little town of Capelona, probably I don't know, maybe 1,000 people. I don't know, maybe
Mm.
not that many. Very small town. Revered. El Profesor is what they call
Okay. Yes.
it, and we're very, pleased to have him there.
What was your impression about him? How did he show up? What qualities did you pick up from him when you go back in your memory?
Well, the first word that comes is sweet. He
Hmm.
was very sweet. He was gentle and humble and, very excited with of what he had to teach. And he was almost completely deaf.
Yeah.
And when people wanted to communicate with him, they shouted at him, literally, because he was very, very deaf. So when we wanted to ask him a question, we would write it down.
Hmm.
We wrote notes back and forth. And then, of course, he would answer
Hmm.
verbally. But one of the things that would often happen is I would write a question and give it to him. and he would start answering, and I'd think, "Oh, he didn't understand the question." But then I
Mm.
realized he was answering the deeper question.
Okay.
Yeah, he was operating on a deeper level and
Mm.
answering a kind of underlying thing rather than
Mm.
just the surface.
Yeah.
That happened many times.
Mm.
He was just a wise man. He was a wise
Mm.
old man, and, to get to study with someone I was 31 years old.
Yeah.
This was 52 years ago.
Yes.
And, yeah, it has remained all these years, like a super high point of my life. I
Mm.
feel like but, I was going it wasn't like a totally different direction, but I know what it's like. It's like here and then like that.
Oh, yeah. So
Of
something was broadening, and it's almost like, when looking at it from this time, that you were put on a path in some way. He gave you a torch because you have actually stayed with psychosynthesis in all these years. So that perhaps there has been some kind of a transmission, or just seeing you and acknowledging you as a future teacher within this tradition.
very much so. He said to us, and I believe he said this to everybody that came and studied with him, "Go start a center. Go for it," you know?
Mm.
Uh, he didn't insist that we had to have, 10 years of training or something. He was like, "Take what you got and go,
Mm.
run with it." So,
Mm.
that blessing.
Were there any particular subjects you were exchanging with him? It could be questions about the self, questions about the superconscious, questions about, because it's quite an advanced psychology, and very often we need some teacher to expand on the psychology and the spirituality in order to start experiencing it oneself.
Well, I would say that the main themes, if you will, that we addressed, one was the psychosynthesis of the couple, because we were there as a couple,
Yes,
and
yes.
he would speak to that. At that time, our older son was 7, and
Mm.
he was very moody, and we were kind of troubled about him. He actually wanted to see their astrological charts, stars as
Okay.
well. He just said he gave us some advice about our son, which was
Mm.
extremely intuitive and
Mm.
accurate. He said that he needs to be outdoors in nature, and
Mm.
that when he gets upset and troubled and moody, to take him outside, get him out into nature. Well,
Yeah,
fortunately, we lived in New Mexico in the farther in Los Alamos, so we had a lot of access to nature,
yeah.
and so we followed that advice when he would start getting unhappy or moody or whatever, we'd drive up to the mountains, which were right there, and I just have this memory of his getting out of the car and walking into the woods, and we could just see the tension falling
Yeah,
off his body, it was
yeah.
like, "Ah, yes." So guess what? This guy grows up to be a wildlife biologist.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
That was great.
So we talked about our kids, we talked about our relationship. We talked about the psychosynthesis of women
Mm.
because he had written a pamphlet, which I read, and we were hanging out in his library, incidentally, between
Yeah,
sessions with him and, reading all his books and all what a wonderful, wonderful, enriched experience. All these people that we didn't know anything about that we were reading, Madame Blavatsky and other, you know,
yes.
esoteric teachers. Anyway,
Mm.
I found this essay he'd written, this monograph on the psychosynthesis of women,
Mm.
and it was interesting, but it was pretty traditional,
Mm.
And when I brought it to his attention, I said, "Well, I found this and I read it." And he kind of flinched and he said, "Oh, you read that and you're not mad at me?" Because he knew
Mm,
it was limiting. So I've gotta rewrite that. I don't think he ever did. But,
no.
but even in its somewhat traditional role, it still was very respectful
Mm,
of women. It was, sort of assuming that they would be housewives, but
mm.
they would be advanced housewives, they would be enlightened
Yeah.
housewives or whatever.
Well,
Yeah,
I actually believe he wrote an updated piece that was brought in the Synthesis Journal, and it was called "A Higher View on Women, the Psychology of Women," or something like that. I will look for it, and I can place a link to it in the video if I
great,
find it,
great.
because I remember that he was, I would not say embarrassed, but he knew that it has to be updated because women was liberated in the
Right,
70s.
right,
And
right, yeah.
so, yeah.
Well, anyway, so
Mm,
that was another one. He had us write a letter to or he gave us sort of 2 assignments. One was to write a letter to our higher self every day,
yes.
which was
Every
something
day. Oh,
already practicing. Well,
yeah.
this is while we were studying with him, you know, it wasn't
Yes.
necessarily because that's all we were doing. We were there for that, you know. And the other thing was to do a free drawing. And no particular you just sit down and see what emerges, what your hand wants to do, just and then he would look at those, especially he would look at the drawings and just kind of ask questions, thought questions about,
Yeah.
what do you think this represents or why do you think this is here? And then he would sometimes say, well, this often I remember one was I drew a fountain,
Mm.
and he said, "Well, a fountain represents" I can't now what remember what he said it represents,
No.
but it might he wasn't saying, "This does," but he would say,
No.
"Might," or, so he would offer possible interpretations that were would just make me look at the thing in a new way and see something
Yeah.
I hadn't seen before.
Yeah.
So that was the more personal work that we did
Mm.
with
Mm.
each of us on, I can't remember that we did any particular I mean, we had studied the basics, so he wasn't, like, talking about the oval diagram or stuff like that because
No.
we already knew that. So it was going deeper. He did introduce us to the meditation booklets from Meditation Mount, which he had
Yes.
written, but they weren't in his name because they were trying to keep that separate, but he had written them and he introduced us to them and started reading.
Yes.
So I started practicing what he called creative meditation at that
Yes.
time,
Yes, indeed.
and it became up till then, I quote, "tried to meditate," which in itself is a oxymoron, but
Mm.
anyway, and I thought you had to clear your mind, and of course, I couldn't ever clear my mind, and so I thought I wasn't doing it right, and
Mm.
what could I do to clear my mind? And, so having his creative meditation practice reflective, receptive, and creative, those 3,
Mm.
gave my very highly developed and very active mind a way to focus,
Exactly.
and that's what I needed. I needed to
Yeah.
focus, and so I would from then on, for many years, I meditated on different qualities, different
Mm.
transpersonal qualities using that
Mm.
practice, and it was
Mm.
very, very enriching, and later, I then learned about Vipassana meditation and started practicing more of that kind of meditation, but I really think that I needed that more structured form to, train my mind.
Exactly. And the different types of meditation develop different aspect of our nature. Creative meditation create and develop our qualities, but Vipassana really centers about, being observer of breath and the psychological processes. So it's two different types of meditation that is very advantageous uh, according to specific needs.
Right, right. Yep. I have them both in my toolkit now. So
Yeah.